Ryan Beal is a biotech trailblazer who spent the last 20 years revolutionizing drug delivery using our skin. Now he's on a bold mission to cure cancer. Let's dive into his journey in this biotech masterclass.
Thrilled to be here, man.
Man, this is, I was reflecting coming into this conversation, and one thing came to my mind. We met 18 years ago at McKinsey, where I started my journey, and that's where we connected. And coincidentally, this is a pure coincidence that October 3rd, 2006 was when I started at the firm. So literally 18 years ago.
Almost
and so
exactly 18 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I, you were one of the people who I met during the process and loved having those conversations. A big part of why I joined the firm. And I think what stood out for me when I think of you is obviously incredible intelligence, but it's the empathy part of it that, literally drew me in. And I think all these 18 years, you haven't lost it. If anything, your empathy's only gone up. And I think that's what's made you successful, but also I love talking to you and I love learning from you. And I think we just have great conversations. So I'm looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to discussing this topic, which, as I think about it, it's all about building a masterclass and building a biotech, really. Because when I think of you and your journey, that's what stands out in terms of the content. And, you have obviously spent many years in medical training, and then you went to McKinsey, but then you fell into this very core place of biotech. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Rohit. And it's awesome to be here. And it's hard to believe it's been 18 years. I know it's been a while, but it doesn't seem like it's been 18. No. But yeah, thrilled to be here. So my quick background, I grew up as basically a science nerd. I loved science and had my eyes on being a doctor from kind of my high school years. And so went off to undergraduate work and then on to medical school, thinking I was going to be a physician. But my life took one of those kind of forks in the road while I was in medical school, and I got a job offer to join McKinsey. Yep. So I thought I'd go get I viewed it as my on-the-job MBA at the time. Yep. And I thought I'd spend a couple years at McKinsey and then I'd come back and do a surgical residency and go be an orthopedic surgeon. And that's what I thought in my early 20s. And then a couple years came and went a couple times at McKinsey and ended up being there 6 or 7 years and meeting you and a bunch of other great people. But that's kind of my background. I've been, in the entrepreneurial space basically for the last 18 years. And I just know that because my oldest son has just turned 18. So 17 years to be precise, because I left the firm when he was 1 year old.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. What a way to calibrate. And in full disclosure, you and I got a chance to work together even at Dyve. And I think that's something that where paths crossed again. And I got to work with you, which is phenomenal. And I think obviously you're working on more of the consumer aspect of it. And since then, you've gone into more of the medical side. You've actually built building a phenomenal company. And so tell us a bit about what that company is, what the mission is, and what drives you and what drove you there in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm co-founder and currently CEO of Dyve Biosciences. And Dyve is a company that's focused on using the skin as a delivery portal for drugs. And what we've developed is a set of science technology that can take a range of molecules from the surface of the skin into the bloodstream and do it with the speed of needles and the bioavailability of a pill. So I'm quite excited about that journey we've been on, and ended up here in kind of a strange way, though, which I think is interesting, at least, from my perspective. I've always been entrepreneurial, but originally when we kind of started developing this IP and when I met the original founder and inventor of the intellectual property of the science, I thought we were going to have a cool skincare company. And that's kind of how it started. And then, like a lot of entrepreneurial journeys and startup journeys, you get into it and you learn something new. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and you shift gears. In this case, we learned that we were getting things far deeper into the skin than we originally thought we would. And we were getting it into the blood. And that kind of changed it from, hey, we've got a cool skincare company, to, hey, we may have a real therapeutics company and a real biotech here.
Amazing. Tell us a bit about what about this. It sounds very cool. It is very cool, right? To be able to bypass the GI tract and use skin, which is the largest organ, to be able to deliver molecules. what makes it incredibly special for those listening? That why does that matter more? Why not continue the traditional path that has been going on for decades, if not centuries?
Yeah, for me, what I find really interesting and stimulating about it is I like coming up with unique ways to solve a problem. And in this case, what excites me is there's so many drugs that we know could work really well if you could deliver them in a more efficient way. And so for me, well, it is a biotech. We're not focused on inventing new drugs. We're focused on looking for existing drugs that are hard on the GI system or require a needle that if we could just change that route of delivery and make it very efficient, we kind of unlock the true efficacy of this drug. And that, at least to me, is what excites me. Is, of course, the original science was and still is very exciting to me, but it was more, how do we apply that in a cool and unique way? And so to me, it was finding these drugs that have some known efficacy, but we can't tap into their potential yet because there's some delivery challenge.
Yeah. So there's two things that come to mind. One is that there is the ecosystem of drugs out there. So you're saying, hey, look, how do we help deliver drugs in a different way so they're more effective as they are? And then second thing is, in addition to the delivery method, there are some drugs out there that whilst you could change the delivery method, they're not getting the full potential. So not only is the method effective, it's making the drug more effective. So it's almost like a double effect. But you're doing something very, very focused. And I think one of the things that always inspired me when I talk to you is that I know you've always wanted to do big things, even though you might have started with the notion of this maybe an aesthetics thing, but sort of turned into more on the medical side. But you're focused on some very specific topics or medical treatments that you're targeting. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are to the extent? And please simplify, because not all of us speak medical. So
yeah. That's probably a big part of how I see my job, actually. And what I do is I'm a bit of an interpreter. I know the science, but I'm also out there talking to investors and the lay people. And that's kind of the sweet spot for me. I'm an interpreter. But one of the areas where we're really focused and that I'm quite passionate about is delivering buffering agents, or in other words, agents that get rid of acidity through the skin. And in particular, I'm quite passionate about the applications in cancer and cancer care. Okay. Tumors are highly metabolic and create a lot of acid around a solid tumor. It creates this acidic halo around the tumor, and that has all kinds of secondary effects. It increases blood vessel growth into the tumor, it increases metastases, and it makes it very hard for existing drugs to work. It's well understood that if you can neutralize that acidity, in other words, with a buffering agent, just like back from middle school chemistry, where you take something acidic and you would add baking soda to it and it would now be neutral. We're doing essentially the same thing, but taking that buffer through the skin and getting it to the tumor in a way that's very challenging to do when you take it through the mouth, because our guts are so acidic that the drug essentially gets consumed in the gut. But if you take it through the skin, you can kind of bypass that challenge and go after the acidity of the tumor. And that's where we're really focused, and it's an area that I'm quite passionate about.
Big area, massive applications, but therein lies the challenge about focusing, right? Because the cancer is such a powerful thing that people are trying to be solved for a long time. People are trying to look at it, and obviously, what sounds like what you've got is the ability to be very targeted through the skin in the areas where it's needed the most. So many questions come to my mind, but as a strategist, how did you narrow it down to where you want to focus? Because I can imagine your brain is probably going, my God, this is something that, both from the point of view of actually doing good, right? Like actually providing a product that really helps. So that expands like what could the universe that you can attack is quite big, which makes your product and the delivery model extremely valuable to a lot of companies out there, a lot of pharmaceuticals out there that are trying to help their patients. But how did you narrow it down as a strategy? And as a strategist yourself, coming from McKinsey, how did that play through?
Yeah, well, you've hit on a big question, right? And something that even as we were reflecting on, one of the audiences for this interview is people that are starting out and considering entrepreneurial journeys, or early on in their entrepreneurial journey. And early on, we were far from focused, and that's part of the excitement when you're doing something new is, especially with a platform technology like we had, taking, all kinds of drugs through the skin.
Yeah.
You're just surrounded by shiny objects. There's a lot of stuff that looks interesting. And I think from an entrepreneur's perspective or a startup's perspective, almost agnostic of industry, that's an important stage to kind of go through, where you're excited by lots of different things. It gives you an opportunity to prove out, test a bunch of different hypotheses, prove out or prove false some of them. And it's kind of like early in your adolescence. You don't know what you want to be when you grow up. You're considering a bunch of different things. And over time, you get pulled in a direction. And a lot of times you're pulled in a direction of something that either you really enjoy or you're really good at. And I think that's very similar to the Dyve journey. Is we tried a lot of things early on, and in that process learned a lot about the core science and learned where it was going to be most impactful. And so we've settled in this unique area where now we're uber focused, because we're also at the stage of a company where you've got to be focused. You've got to move through milestones. You can't continue to experiment. We're not in our adolescence anymore. Now it's like, it's time to deliver. Yeah, exactly. So now we're just, it's really focused on that core application.
Got it. That's such an important statement you make, because I think a lot of us who get into the entrepreneurial world get into it because it's exciting, it's fun, you're solving a problem, you're passionate about it. And what you're saying is that don't get stifled too early. Allow that creativity, allow that experimentation to come through, because you just don't know where you'll end up. Even what you've said already, you started at point A, which was purely on the aesthetic side, and you thought, they might be a very different company. And where you, through that allowance or giving yourself the permission to go do that, creates that opportunity for discovery, and both self-discovery, but discovery of the product, discovery of the markets, discovery of the applications, the company, depending on your industry. And I can speak for myself as an entrepreneur. You often sometimes go that there is this urge to, generate revenue. There's an urge to get to market quickly, because there's this, sometimes induced pressure of like, oh my God, I'm not moving fast enough, or how do I prove it out? And what you were saying is that'll happen, but give yourself the permission to just partly to enjoy it, but partly to also make sure that you land in a place that naturally works for your product, service, what it is that you're building, because the market will find you and you'll find the market. Rushing too quickly, you may miss out the bigger opportunity. And is that the right way to think about it? Yeah, I think you hit it on the head.
And I liked what you said about giving yourself permission, because I do think, we're so driven and so focused, and you want to get that first customer or make that first sale or whatever it is. And that's all important stuff. So it's a balance, but I think there is a bit of just give yourself permission to kind of let this, learn through the process. And, you've got to be rigorous about it too. You can't just go on doing that forever, but give yourself a little bit of permission, a little bit of grace too, because, you're going to fail. You're going to hear no a lot. You're going to, all these things. So it's okay. Just learn from the experience and evolve. And eventually, you'll end up in the right spot and focus on the right area.
To your point about being structured, being rigorous, being diligent and thoughtful, how much of your training at McKinsey or medical school helped you in that process? And how much of it was a toolkit that you never had, that you had to figure out? You built it as you went along? Question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was more built as I went along, to be honest. And I think I was a student for so long, in medical school. So there you may learn there's some big guideposts in your life, the end of the semester, the end of the year, graduation. And I think that did help. I was kind of always on these 4-year cycles, undergraduate work, medical school, et cetera. And I think that has helped, where I have kind of the big guideposts along the way. But then on the complete other end, when I was at McKinsey, very short-term projects, at least from the bulk of my experience, a long project was maybe 3 months. And that was a really long project, at least for me at the time. I was on a lot of MA kind of things. It was just very quick paced. And so there wasn't a lot of this longer term planning. It was crank, get to the answer, and then the next study. And so I think a lot of it for me, Rohit, was self-learned and learning from a lot of other kind of mentors post post McKinsey. And once I was on my entrepreneurial journey, just being around other founders, other investors, and having them kind of set those interim guideposts for me.
What are some of the things that you felt that you wish you had known before getting into the startup? What are things that you say, hey, I wish I'd known that because that could have saved me a lot of time? So a thing that you'd leave other people listening in saying, yeah, what did you learn, Ryan, that I don't have to make that same mistake?
Yeah, I mean, you may have to make the same mistake. I'll just say that, and mistakes are okay. And I think lessons learned, it's going to be so unique to the individual. But for me, one of the big lessons was all around the importance of a team and surrounding. And by the way, you hear this all the time, right? But it's when the rubber really hits the road, it is so important. And I think for me, the reason I say it was one of those things I learned once I was out on my entrepreneurial journey, because it was something that I also was able to take advantage of at some place like McKinsey, where a lot of us are wired very similarly, just driven, analytical, young, full of energy. But you get out in the real world and the bell curve is a lot wider, and what motivates people and what's important to them and how you pull that all together is something that I'd never really had to do before, because I was just handed a team and they were all great and highly motivated. And so that was probably one thing that took some getting used to, kind of immediately in my entrepreneurial journey. That was something I had to learn.
Yeah. And I think in the real world, and by that I mean non-McKinsey, Bain, BC, whatever, consulting, investment banking, where the natural athlete is already hyper-focused. You've got all sorts of other athletes that can add a ton of tremendous value that you just, quite frankly, I didn't have, right? And bringing that real world experience and how to talk to a customer, how to find a customer, how to build an operations, the stuff that actually makes companies grow, that happens in the real world. And I think what you're saying is appreciating the people that come to your team, and then what do they bring to the table, and learning from them is a big part of it. I think that's such a valuable thing you just laid out. Yeah. Let's get into a little more on the biotech side of it, the building and scaling this business. One of the things you mentioned early on was this notion of experimentation, and then you're tying it to the team. So maybe we'll start there. You've got a strategy, you've given yourself permission to explore, but therein lies this notion of how do you narrow down? So what are some of the things you used, principles or practices, to take what could be a very big market and narrow it down to a handful of things that you say, this is what we're going to go invest our time and money in? So
yeah, I think the way we've always thought of it is kind of I'll give you two lenses through which we looked at it. One was I like to have multiple shots on goal. So I did want to diversify the business to some degree and try to have some, some of that lower hanging fruit that we felt more likely to succeed. And there, we still have programs that are very focused on the aesthetic space, for example. But I did want to diversify and have some easy, quote unquote, easier success stories. But then I also wanted to have some moonshots, which were really far out there, and let's swing for the fences. But if it's successful, potentially could be an enormous game changer. And that's, so those two bookends are kind of oncology on one side and skincare on the other. So that diversification was always important to me. And then along with that, thinking through it almost in the time horizons. There's going to be some things in the short term that we want to do, but also some long-term higher risk things that we think could be real game changers.
Yeah. So if someone's listening in saying, hey, Ryan, what I'm hearing you say is that on the one hand, you've told me, give me permission to experiment. But on the other hand, what you're saying to me is that give yourself a specific timeline. In your example, you had some time bound saying for up until this time, we're going to do these things and then we're going to narrow down. So being disciplined in the diversification, but by bounding it with time, it allows you to, play different games and then to say, okay, now I've done that. And again, to your point, be hypothesis driven, whether you're proving it or disproving it, and then get to, okay, now that I've done that, I've had my playtime, and I'm going to gradually narrow it down by a time TX, right? And so is that what you ended up using?
Yeah, in large part. And I think the overlay on that is it's a capital allocation exercise, or I should not just capital, resource allocation. And so, I think that's one thing we've done fairly well over time is think about how we're allocating those resources, and whether you're, an investor or an operator, at the end of the day, it boils down to resource allocation and how are you going to optimize for some value later based on how you allocate those resources today. And that's a bit of that near-term low-hanging fruit versus the long-term moonshot stuff. That is how we think of it. And that allocation will change over time as the risk, the risk equation changes.
Is that a unique thing for the industry that you're in versus, if I'm doing a sort of more a simpler service, because yours is very complex, medically driven, because it naturally requires a lot of long-term studies.
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, let me back up actually. Now that I said I think it is, I think it, I'm looking at it through the lens of my industry.
Yeah.
But I would think if I'm in another industry, it's the same. There's the same set of just resource allocation questions. I mean, I'm thinking through, like Berkshire Hathaway, right? That's all resource allocation. Their assets are different and their risk profiles are different, but they're thinking about the same basic principles. Instead of, if you think of Dyve as a conglomerate, my assets are individual drugs that I'm trying to develop, not See's Candy versus a railroad company versus something else. But I think it's the same basic principle.
Yeah. What you were saying is three things. Number one is use time-based for your experimentation. So give yourself permission, but make it time-bound. Number two is think about resource allocation, because that's finite, right? And within that resource allocation, there's both the people side and the capital side. And then third is what you're saying is use a hypothesis-driven approach. So it allows you to quickly deploy those resources strategically and get rid of certain things that you found that, okay, that's probably not my biggest ROI. And then that allows an entrepreneur, especially in this industry, to focus. That raised the question because you brought up the word experimentation a few minutes ago. But when it comes to people, how do you decide how people work on these sort of longer term things that may not work out, and then you have to kill the project? So the project you're working on may get canceled. And so how do you motivate people? Because you as a CEO and founder know more than maybe the team does. So just curious about the balance that you strike there.
Yeah, I mean, I probably err on the side of being pretty darn transparent. And obviously there are always things that are in my head that I'm not sharing, but I think that's just my style, is to try to be pretty transparent about the challenges ahead, what's going well, but may not be going well. And I view it as an important part of at least the team I've built. Doesn't mean there aren't different ways to do it that may also be successful. But to me, I try to be very transparent with people and bring them along that journey. So, which I think the implication is when you have to kill a program, if you do have to kill a program, it's not a total shock. They've been along for the journey, and they appreciate the risks and challenges that are inherent in that program. So if it does need to be killed, there's some level of understanding there. So I think that's how I've handled it, Rohit, for the most part.
So one of the questions I often get from founders and even growth business owners on the private equity side is that, hey, how much do I share with my team? Because people who have, like yourselves, are more people oriented, right? They're really wanting to make sure the team's onboarded. There's like, I can only share so much. So if you're, say, for example, exiting a company, doing a capital raise, valuation rounds, things that the team may be interested in. So how have you balanced some of these big things that may be happening behind the scenes?
I think it's one of the areas that I've had to learn a lot over time. And I know I've made some big mistakes here because my instincts, because like you said, I am a people person, I am transparent, but where it's gotten me into trouble is I maybe overshare. I'm like in the past, I don't think I do it anymore, but certainly early on, I would take advantage of sharing what's in my head with others because it would make it feel like I'm not carrying it all, even though I should be carrying it. But the implication for the team may be they get to see all this craziness that's in my head and get whipsawed around more than they need to, or is even fair to them. And they may be exposed to questions or uncertainties that they shouldn't even be worried about. But earlier in my career, not intentionally, but I think I was doing that probably because it helped me feel better about it. And what I've learned over time is there is a balance you can strike there, be very transparent, but also there's a reason not to be sometimes. The rest of the team doesn't need to know every little challenge, and it's not fair to them either. because you don't need to stress them out when it's not necessary. And the other thing is, I think just when you're big announcements or strategic changes and things, I've also made the mistake of announcing those too early before something's fully baked. Yeah. And then a bunch of questions come in and you're not ready to answer questions, or you end up changing strategies again. And just that whipsawing isn't fair to the team. And so now I try to be much more measured about when I share and what I share, but have an open door policy. I'm always, and actually maybe now that in this therapy session that we're having now, Rohit, this is maybe the big insight that I've just had, is I have very much an open door policy where people can ask questions, and I'll be a straight shooter. Like, I'm going to tell you what I think. And that's probably the change that's happened, say, over the last 15 years. Is before I probably would just more proactively share. Yep. And now I've been more reactive, but I'll be open with you. I'll tell you straight.
I really like that idea, because I think what you're saying is, first of all, just for everyone hearing, you're not saying stop being a people person. Yeah. That's not the takeaway. If anything, it's the opposite. What you're saying is that what you were leaning in on was this instinct of sharing more makes you feel not only good, but also you're able to get that you're soliciting problem solving from the broader team. So everyone feels like they're on the same team. However, what you're also getting at is not everyone can or should deal with certain problems. So what you've done over the years is, rather than completely stopping that sharing process, you say, look, I'll be very judicial in what I share when, but let's open the door. So if somebody else thinks of their question, you'll still happy to divulge, because as the founder CEO, you can react better, but you'll stick to your values of being honest, being empathetic, making sure people understand the why, when, how, but let them be the ones, thinking about the question, because that's how you've at least struck the balance. One of the other things that comes to mind when you think about a biotech and a platform, science-based technology, is R&D work, right? That's unique. If you're in a service business, not so much. If you're in a CPG business, maybe some, but not as much. How has that shaped your go-to-market strategy? Because there's long lead times before you know if what we've got is real or not. So how do you think about R&D, specifically for those who are in a science-backed company, right, where they've got to deploy those resources differently?
Well, yeah, I think our lead times are so long, for a set of products, many years where you're doing research or waiting for data back, that it's quite hard. And you're thinking through that, I'll call it the sales cycle is, nearly a decade for a drug to be developed, right? So there's, on one hand, those kinds of products where you're chunking it out by phase of development and seeing what you can answer in each phase, and then learning from that data and changing maybe how you study it in the next phase. But then that gets back to the time horizons thing we were talking about earlier. There's a set of products where a customer may be another pharmaceutical company that's trying to solve some delivery challenge. And those can be very short-term product market discussions that we'll have. And so, it's very different depending on the part of the portfolio we're focused on.
Yeah. How does that sort of goes back to, you've obviously got investors and people who are looking to say, hey, look, what's the return on investment? So does that change your strategy on how and where you raise capital and when you raise capital, because of this notion of long lead time cycles? Because general concept is, you get to a product, you've got something, the conventional wisdom, if you want to use that, is like, let's go raise a bunch of money. But in your case, the ROI on that may not be known. So does that change the profile of investors that a biotech really goes after, as well as what you tell them and how you manage them? Yeah,
well, and I think the type of investor that makes up your cap table also changes over time. At least for us, it has. I think there's kind of your cookie cutter biotech investment approach. When I say cookie cutter, just what many people do, and it's early stage VC backed. Large chunk of capital comes in initially, and that supports a bunch of research, and then another round, and eventually a crossover round, and then an IPO. And that is, one path, and that's a path most have gone down. But there are many other paths to getting funded. And, we started off with more what I would say a non-biotech startup environment. And part of that's probably because what we thought we had at the time was a skincare company, but it was your standard, we put in some cash, friends and family put in cash, and we didn't raise a lot initially, but then we learned and experimented, and then there were more friends and family, and then family office dollars, and and then ultimately industry dollars and things like that. So it's changed over time as we've matured as a company, but it's always changing.
Yeah. And that's interesting and how much of that is changing also because the industry might be evolving? Is there an industry evolution aspect that you've got to keep up with because of those lead times and long sales cycle? We're calling it sales cycle, but it's almost like R&D/sales cycle.
It's at least I haven't seen the industry necessarily. I wouldn't call it an evolution of the industry. Yep. More it's just market driven. So I've lived through up markets and boom markets, and bust markets and down markets, and then the pandemic, and that's more, I think, had more influence on at least during my kind of 15 to 20 year snippet in the biotech world. It's more market driven. What's going on in the broader markets, and is there a lot of turnover of capital, meaning they're having exits and now they can redeploy that capital in different startups? Or is it a slow market where capital's tied up and people are hesitant to put dollars in? And that, those markets are very different, and where you go for capital, how you manage your internal resources, how much time you need to make sure you have on either end. No company wants to run out of capital. And that's the real challenge in biotech, is there is so much uncertainty on that product market or research cycle. And at the same time, there's the market that's always changing. And so you've got to keep both in mind and be able to weather any storm.
So what would be your counsel to those entering this space or entering a product/platform where, you do have those sort of longer cycle times, especially as they think about the go-to-market strategy on the product is not,
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be very resilient. There are going to be unanticipated challenges, and you have to have the mindset of just wanting to keep going and finding a way to move forward. Like, there are going to be multiple points in your company's life cycle where it would be very legitimate to just say, all right, it didn't work out. That happens, right? But entrepreneurs find a way to keep things going. So I think that resiliency is very important. I think the other thing that's linked to that is it's plan on it taking longer and budget as if it's going to take longer. And then maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised and it won't take as long. But I think if you budget with that mindset, and it'll serve you well. Because you run into lots of challenges that you didn't anticipate, and you can create your first pitch deck and your first business plan, and it all sounds great, but it's not gonna work out that way. It's always going to take a little longer and a little more money. What has helped you stay motivated in that journey? Like, what's the thing that you leaned on the most? Well, I think the main thing at the end of the day is I believe we can have incredible patient impact. And it's very personal to me on the oncology side. As you know, like, I'm a cancer survivor. And so that's a big part of the motivation. Like, I'd say that's the biggest piece. But then there's a lot of interim kind of motivations too. I love problem solving. I love being around bright, intellectually curious people. So there's the day-to-day kind of what keeps me going. That's the people. There's the interim kind of the medium-term stuff, which is usually problem solving driven. And, there's something we can do there. And then the very long term is more the patient impact and being able to, the hope to be able to impact in a major way cancer patients. I love that. And I know your journey and I know that personally motivates you, but you've always been motivated on that topic, and which is why you set out. I've got the privilege of knowing you and in terms of how you're driven. But I think the recent events have also further fueled you to continue to be on this path. Your topic about resilience, or your point about resilience, resonates a lot. And I think you're spot on. Everything takes way longer than you had thought it would. It's almost like, and when you think of, okay, I'll add more time, add a bit more after that, because it'll just take me a bit more longer. What I hear you say, there are milestones that you can set that allow you to, when you achieve them, refuels you and the team, especially in these long lead time
companies and industries, and it could be technology, it could be science, it could be medicine, whatever it is, you've got, if you have those milestones, because the end game is so far away, use those near-term milestones as points of success, points of celebration, because that's another place to kind of refuel your tank with energy. Is that something you do proactively with your team, where you go in and say, hey, look, we've achieved these things? Are there things that you wish you did more that you do now?
Yeah, I think, again, this is an area where I've developed over time, and it's because others have highlighted the importance of it. But those celebrating even small successes is so important. Like it ends up just over time, collectively, it's just a huge thing. Both like personally, I've enjoyed it, but as a team, you see the real benefits. And so often early on, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like this, we're just so driven. And it's just like you said, even early on, we got to get the revenues, we got to get our client, and so you have the one goal in mind, the end goal in mind, which is great, but we don't celebrate those interim milestones, or even what I would call just little small successes. Like, could be really small, but taking the time to back up and recognize someone for, maybe it's a great presentation, but they did a great job on a conference call or a Zoom, like things that a lot of times we think of as that was a trivial thing, but those little things add up over time and really matter. And it's something that I've, again, with the help of many others that remind me to do this kind of thing, these kinds of things, it's somewhere I focus more on today than I certainly did 10 years ago.
I want to go back to that point about recognizing, acknowledging people. You know, you've consistently in this conversation, and not surprisingly, talked about the importance of people, right? And how they've helped you, not just at the product and company level, but personally through your journey, in terms of like all these sort of insights and teachings that your team has brought to you. And it's not just, it's your broader team, right? So it's the people that are on your team that are working with you, but then there is the third parties that you collaborate with, and there are the investors that you work with, and people and advisors that you've surrounded yourself with, which is also something I know that you've gone ahead and very thoughtfully picked people to be your board of advisors, so they can bring insights that nobody on your team can, and that's why you build that group. And so the question for you is that how much of what you were building as a founder, especially in this long biotech cycle, do you spend time building the next generation of leaders in your company? Because of the fact that there is that, okay, I'm on this project, I'm here for like 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. What happens to me next? Because they've got to commit to a very long time with you. Most other employees would say 3-4 years in a company, I'm going to go get some different experience in a different organization, right? A different title. How have you worked through the retention and development of people on that front?
Well, I think there are maybe a couple answers here, a couple ways to look at it. And I have always really been into people development, you know, both my own, but also the team. And I think it's, all the way back to, 18 years ago when we met. It was just, and part of it is, it's like I get a lot of joy out of it. So, and, it goes back to just being a people person, but I like to think of myself as a people developer and someone that likes to be developed. And so it's just always been important to me. And I think we put a big emphasis on it, both at Dyve today, of trying to create opportunities for people to develop, both on the personal side and the professional side. And, from very little things to, bigger things like helping with tuition or whatever the case may be, but to very little things at work, like helping with presentation style and all different things. But I also think there's part of it has been celebrating when people do leave. Because you mentioned, someone may be around 3-4 years and then want to do something else or spread their wings. I'd love for everyone to want to stay with Dyve, but I also recognize it's a unique environment, and I want to celebrate when people leave too. And so we try to do that as well. And then both as a company, but also as an individual, I follow the people's career and stay in touch with them. And I want to think of it as a smaller alumni network, but I always want them to think of their time with Dyve as a special time in their life, whether it was 2 years or 6 years or 8 years. I want them to look back and just feel like that was an important time. I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, obviously I'm one of those alums, and so I think, and that's why I think thinking of yourself, and I speak from this end of the spectrum, is you've got that connective tissue that's always there. But what you're saying is it's your job as a leader, as the founder, to continue to keep it alive and to make sure that yes, the time will move on, people will sort of separate, but by staying in touch, it allows you to keep it active, maybe is a better word, an active alumni group. And so, and in whichever way, it could just be a conversation, or it could be alums may come back, or they may invest, or they may have other ideas, or vice versa. And so I really like for those listening to say, think of your employees as alums. And obviously you're not trying to create a big alumni group, so you're not proactively creating exits. But when that does happen, think of it that way, because there are people who do get upset or bummed about the fact that when teams leave. If it's a good exit, a healthy exit, it creates an alumni group that they will go and talk about your business and vice versa, right? Because it's a support network. I love that.
I think it's kind of just a mindset thing from the get-go. When someone joins your company, like, I just don't think of it as transactional either. They're not joining my company until they leave. Like, they're becoming, in a startup, it's tough. Like, you're becoming part of a family in a way, making a lot of sacrifices. We're expecting you to make sacrifices, and it impacts your partner, your family, because it's a crazy, startups are crazy. So I want to view it as, hey, you're part of the family, and we're going to celebrate when you leave, while at the same time hoping that we can create an environment where you want to stay. But that just doesn't always work out.
Ron, we've talked, stepping back, we talked a bit about product development in this space and how that sort of takes its time. We've talked about strategy and how that's constantly evolving, and market forces impact strategy. You've talked about people and capital deployment and how to be thoughtful around that, and resource allocation, R&D. If you step back, as you think about, as we get towards the close of this conversation, what are some of the best practice advice do you have for founders, both for themselves, right? Because, being in the founders and CEO shoes is very lonely. We know that. So what counsel would you give them that you haven't already shared? And what investing in a business in an environment with long sales cycle, lead times, anything that you can share on those fronts?
I think from the founder advice perspective, the one thing that we didn't hit on is it's going to be your life. And so you better enjoy it. Like, I, on one hand, don't feel like I have a job, but on the other hand, I'm working all the time. Like, I'm always working, but I enjoy it so much. I feel incredibly lucky because I don't feel like I have a job. And I wish that for my team. I want them to feel the same way just working for Dyve. But I wish it upon founders or future founders. You've got to be so passionate, or I hope you can find a passion, something that you're passionate about, whether it's a problem you're trying to solve or a market you're trying to influence or a group of people you want to work with. It's going to envelope your life. And when that happens, you want it to be truly enjoyable all the time. So, I would that's my thing. I would expect it. And to really, I think, to optimize your chances for success, that's how you have to approach your entrepreneurial endeavor. It's got to be your life.
How do you strike balance then? I know exactly what you mean. I think the question really comes back to is that if it's all your life and you're enjoying it, when do you switch off? Because I just had a conversation with somebody who'd worked with professional athletes, and he brought in, and now he works with executive athletes or corporate athletes, and the idea of recovery is such a big, and I know you're an athlete, and the idea of recovery is such a big piece of refueling. So to your point, and I love it, and I think what you're wishing upon founders is to have found something that they're so passionate that it doesn't feel like work. But if you're always training and if you're always competing, you're going to get fatigued. So how do you balance
that? I'm really glad you said that, because the last thing I would want is to leave people with the idea that this guy is crazy and all he does is work. And that's what I think the recipe is. So I'm glad you brought that up, Rohit, because I think that rest and recovery and downtime, time away, time with family, time with your partner, whatever it is such an important part of being productive professionally. For me, I've always, like, way back, even when we met but I've always been someone that really focuses on what most people call work-life balance and the importance of that. To me, my work and my life has in many ways blended together, but I see so many opportunities to disconnect from work and recharge the brain. Like I love, before I went through my health stuff, I loved trail running, and now I'm more a hiker, but I love being outside. I love the outdoors. I love going to my kids' soccer games. And when I'm there, I'm unplugged. Like I'm not the dad on the sidelines on his phone or taking phone calls. And to me, it's very important to have those boundaries, because that's how I recharge. Yep. And then I can plug back in and feel energized. Because we've all been there where you overwork yourself, and it's not the best you. So you need to build those things in. So I'm glad you said that.
No, absolutely, because it is the fact. And I think the next level, maybe perhaps it's the next conversation in a follow-on, would be, how do you switch the brain off? Because you may be away from your phone, you may be away from your laptop, you may not be in a meeting room or the environments that you created, even though you might be on a soccer pitch and the sidelines, your brain's still working. And so I think but that's maybe a deeper question. But I do think that's another next level challenge, that once you've created environments, which is what you're saying, create environments that help you disconnect from friends, family, location. But the ultimate disconnect is when you stop thinking about work for that minute. And I think that's really the break, because all of us entrepreneurs, founders, we're just invested. We're like constantly, if you love problem solving, you're always solving a problem.
Yeah.
Healthy sickness that you kind of sometimes don't want to have, because you're always
You're always thinking. Yeah.
You're always thinking.
But for me, the very short answer, and it is worthy of a bigger conversation, but for me, at least what works in terms of flipping that is physical activity. So it's, that's how I get my brain to shut off, is I really nerd out on the physical side, like on running, and I get into my pace and my, it pulls my brain away from work stuff. And that's my trick, but it's hard, man.
It is hard, and I'm the same. I go train, and when you go heavy, when you're moving heavy weight, you're not thinking about anything else. But like, I better move it properly before I get injured. And then I think you get into the mechanics, the biomechanics. You get within your body as opposed to outside your body. And I think that's part of what people talk a lot about, being aware and being meditative, is sort of you go in and sort of see what's happening. And so I think whatever it is, anyone who's listening is like, find that thing that allows you to actually mentally switch off, because you can change the environment, but also stop the mind. Ryan, last piece, I always have my guests to leave us with, one do and one don't, as you think about building a biotech, building companies, having work-life balance, focused on mission. You pick your favorite topic, because we've covered so much. What is one do and one don't that you'd leave our listeners with, especially those who are building companies and leading people, right?
I would say, do pick a team that you enjoy spending a lot of time with. That's very important.
Yep, love that.
On the don't side, I'd say, I'm trying to figure out a way to articulate it, but it links back to what we were just saying, is don't forget to have balance in your life.
Ryan, thank you so much. This has been super, super insightful. I love talking to you anyway, but this has been great. Thank you for taking the time and sharing with our audience everything that you've learned. That you've been very honest, but that's exactly what I expected. Empathy and EQ comes through. So thank you again.
Thank you, Rohit. It's a pleasure, man. It's always good chatting.
Same here. Talk soon. Bye.
Cheers.
Looking for more ideas on how to accelerate your business growth, hire amazing people, and improve your leadership potential? Check out our full-length episodes on the People Quotient podcast. Subscribe now.